The cold wind hit Marcus's face as he pedaled down the cracked sidewalk, each breath a thin, biting cloud in the early morning air. The bike's tires hummed against the asphalt, but the creak of the pedals sounded louder than usual, like they too were weary from the long hours of work. He was just one of many, a delivery worker in a city that had little time to notice his struggles. As the miles piled on, so did the weight of the unspoken. He was used to the silence of those encounters, the kind where you were made to feel invisible, like you didn't matter. The feeling settled in his chest like a knot that wouldn't loosen. He pressed forward, trying to ignore the fatigue in his limbs, the ache that was always present now. "Hey, you're late," a man's voice shouted from behind as Marcus stopped in front of an apartment building. Marcus didn't say anything back. He didn't have the energy to argue, not today. But it wasn't the insult that stung most. It was the thought that maybe, just may, he could have been treated with dignity. He rode off, his legs aching, the smell of the wet rain mingling with the exhaust fumes as cars whizzed by. And that was the hardest part. By the time Marcus reached the next house, he was exhausted. He set the package down on the doorstep, just like he always did, and turned to leave. A loud voice cut through the silence. "Hey!" Marcus froze, the hairs on his neck standing up as he turned around to face the voice. "You're supposed to be here at 10 a.m. Marcus didn't respond, knowing from experience that nothing he said would matter. "What are you looking at?" The words hit him like a slap in the face. He kept his eyes down, taking a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. But he couldn't help it. "Just take the damn package and move on," the man spat before slamming the door in his face. Marcus stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his ears. It wasn't just about the job. He sighed, pushed the pain deep down, and turned to get back on his bike. Marcus's legs burned as he pedaled through the empty streets, the weight of the day pressing down on him with every push of the pedal. It was past noon now, and the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks. The quiet that followed the insults, the quiet that came after the door slammed, the quiet that never seemed to end. His bike was old, its frame bent in places from years of use. The tires were bald, but it didn't matter. The next delivery was in a nicer part of town. The buildings were taller, the streets cleaner, the people dressed in ways that made Marcus feel even more out of place. He got off the bike, feeling the familiar ache in his legs, and walked up to the door. She didn't smile. "Package for you," Marcus muttered, holding it out. The woman didn't take it right away. Marcus's fingers closed around the bill, but he didn't look at it. He didn't have the energy to pretend that this was any different from the other. "Have a good day," she said, the words flat and insincere. He forced a smile, nodded, and turned to leave, not waiting for the door to slam behind him this time. The street was quieter now, the usual bustle of people going about their business starting to fade. Another delivery. But there was a quiet weight in his chest, something deeper than the exhaustion. He passed by a church as he rode down a side street. The doors were open, and for a moment he thought about stopping. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered to himself, even though he knew that tomorrow would be the same as today. He turned the corner, and the bike's tires hit a rough patch of gravel. It was the kind of road that rattled the bones and made his teeth clench. The sky had darkened by the time Marcus reached his next stop, the familiar heaviness settling back into his shoulders like a sack of stones. He didn't mind the weight. He was used to it. The house was small, tucked between two others that had clearly seen better days. As he knocked, the sound of his fist against the wood echoing in the quiet air. "Package," Marcus said, keeping his voice low. He didn't want to pry. She nodded but didn't take the package immediately. "You've been out here a long time, haven't you?" Her voice cracked as she spoke, and Marcus felt the sudden urge to say something, anything. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. The woman didn't argue, but something passed between them in that brief moment. Something unspoken. "I'll pray for you," she said, her eyes not leaving his. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He didn't believe in prayer, not anymore at least. "Thanks," he muttered, not knowing why he said it, but the words felt like they had been waiting to come out for a long time. He turned away quickly, not wanting her to see the way his throat tightened at the simple gesture. Hope. He didn't know what to do with it, so he did what he always did. He pushed it down, burying it beneath the weight of his responsibilities. The bike creaked under him as he climbed back onto it, the wheels spinning beneath him. Marcus didn't notice the rain at first. His body was already tired, already worn from the day's work, but the rain made it worse. He kept riding, the rain pelting down on him, blurring the road ahead. But it wasn't just the rain that blurred his vision. At the next stop, the door slammed in his face without a word. And yet, despite the ache in his legs and the weariness in his heart, there was something else there too. Maybe it wasn't about escaping. The rain didn't stop. It just kept coming, soaking through Marcus's jacket, turning the streets into rivers and the sidewalks into slick, dangerous paths. He had one more stop to make, just one more. It felt like he had been riding forever, but the day wasn't done yet. As he pedaled down the street, a thought crossed his mind, one that he didn't dare let linger. What if it was all just a waste? He shook the thought away, pushing forward, determined not to let it consume him. He had to keep moving. When he reached the house, it looked like every other house in the neighborhood, big, impersonal, surrounded by a tall iron fence. He rang the doorbell. No answer. He rang again. He stepped back, glancing around for a place to leave the package. But as he did, he noticed something that stopped him cold. The man didn't even look at Marcus as he walked past him, didn't say anything, just kept moving, like Marcus wasn't even there. Mark. Gas's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream. He wanted to lash out and demand to be seen, to demand that people acknowledge the effort, the pain, the exhaustion he went through every single day just to survive. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The rain was coming down harder now and the cold was creeping into his bones. "You're late," she said, before he could say a word, her tone sharp, as if it were his fault that the rain was pouring and the day was dragging on. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Just leave it on the porch and go," she said, holding out her hand to take the package, her eyes never meeting his. Marcus handed it over, and she didn't even bother to acknowledge him, turning on her heel and slamming the door shut without another word. He stood there for a moment, his chest tight, his heart heavy with the same old feeling. It wasn't the words that stung. He turned away, the rain soaking his hair, his clothes, his soul. But as he rode back to his bike, something unexpected happened. It wasn't his own voice, and it wasn't the voice of anyone around him. "Keep going," it said. Marcus froze. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he looked around, as if expecting someone to be standing nearby. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he felt something. For the first time in a long while, Marcus believed that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this world than the pain he carried. The rain hadn't let up by the time Marcus reached his next stop. The streets were slick with water, the gutters swollen and overflowing. He paused outside the building, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had gripped him. The voice that whispered to him still echoed in his mind. He stepped off his bike and walked up the stairs to the apartment. Marcus knocked on the door, his knuckles scraping against the wood. He waited, listening for footsteps, but none came. But before he could turn away, the door opened. "Delivery," Marcus said. "Holly, ding out the box." She took the package, her fingers brushing against his. For a brief moment their eyes met. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Marcus nodded, his heart beating a little faster than before, but as he turned to leave, she called out to him, "Wait." He stopped, surprised. The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I've seen you out here before." Marcus didn't know how to respond. He hadn't ever thought about it like that. "You deserve better than his," she continued. "You deserve peace. You deserve to be seen." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had never had anyone look at him like this before. "It's not easy," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I know," she replied, her voice steady, filled with understanding. "But it will get easier. There's a place for you in this world and you'll find it. But you have to believe that." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had heard these words before, from others, from strangers. "Thank you," he say. His voice barely audible. She smiled, her face softening. And then, before he could say anything else, she closed the door softly, leaving him standing there, the words echoing in his mind. "You deserve better than this." He stood there for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Marcus looked down at his feet, standing in the rain, the cold creeping into his bones. For the first time that day, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He pushed the thought down quickly. He didn't have tea. Time for this. And for once they didn't feel like a lie. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time Marcus mounted his bike again. The streets shimmered beneath the streetlights, reflecting the faint glow of the city. He pedaled slowly, not sure of where his thoughts were taking him. His next stop was in a neighborhood on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a place he came to often, a small strip of houses that looked like they had seen better days. As he approached the address, he saw T. Hay House in the distance, a small one-story with peeling paint and a sagging roof. He reached the porch and knocked, feeling the familiar anxiety twist in his stomach. But this time, the door opened slowly, and an elderly man stood in the doorway. "You're a little late," the man said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Marcus blinked in surprise. I'm fine here, sir," Marcus said, glancing down at the package in his hands. "Nonsense," the man replied. "You've been out in that rain for hours. Have I sent you?" It was an offer Marcus couldn't refuse, not because he needed a drink, but because he hadn't realized how much he had needed someone to notice. He stepped inside the house, the warmth immediately wrapping around him like a blanket. The man motioned for him to sit down at the small kitchen table, and Marcus did so, glancing around the room. "You ever been to church?" the man asked, sitting down across from him. Marcus shook his head. The man nodded, as if he expected the answer. "I used to go every Sunday. Don't anymore, though." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. The man leaned forward, his eyes softening as he spoke again. "I can see it in you, that weight you're carrying. I've seen it before, son." For a moment, Marcus didn't speak. He wasn't sure he knew how to respond. The elderly man reached for the kettle on the stove and poured hot water into 2 cups, then passed one to Marcus. Marcus looked down at the cup in his hands. "I've lived a long time," the man said. "And I've learned that faith doesn't always come in the way you expect. Sometimes it comes through people." Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to believe those words. "I'll try," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a flicker of something inside him, a flicker that said, maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The morning sun finally pierced through the clouds as Marcus set off again, the weight of the day already began to settle on him. His legs ached from the constant pedaling, but he pushed forward, driven by something more than just the next delivery. He didn't know what it was exactly. Maybe it was the words from the old man. Maybe it was the quiet whisper that had followed him since the night before. He pedaled through the streets, the neighborhoods blending into one another, the faces of strangers passing him by. There was still the usual indifference, the usual avoidance, but Marcus held his head a little higher today. The next stop was at a larger house, one of the many that lined the more affluent parts of the city. Marcus could feel the difference in the air as soon as he arrived. He stepped off his bike, glancing at the package in his hand. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest for reasons he couldn't fully explain. "You're late," the man said, his tone colder than the wind outside. "I'm sorry, sir." "I don't care about traffic," the man interrupted, stepping forward and snatching the package from Marcus's hands. Marcus stood there, the words stinging more than they should have. He wanted to argue, to stand up for himself, but he didn't. "Have a good day," the man said, closing the door in Marcus's face without another glance. For a moment, Marcus just stood there, staring at the door that had just slammed in his face. His chest was tight, the familiar feeling of frustration rising inside him. He turned away, not sure what to do with the anger that was building inside him. He had learned to swallow it down, to let it go. As he rode away from the house, the rain began to fall again, a steady drizzle that soaked through his clothes. He had never felt so small, so invisible, so insignificant. But as he turned the corner, the voice whispered again, soft, insistent, almost like a reminder. "You are not alone." Marcus stopped. He wasn't sure why he had paused, but the words rang in his ears like a bell. He looked around, half expecting to see someone standing. Zhang there, but there was no one. He was alone, yes. But the words lingered, and for the first time Marcus realized that maybe being alone didn't mean he was abandoned. The rest of the day passed in a blur. More deliveries, more doors slammed, more faces that looked through him without seeing. The weight was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had before. The words, the ones the old man had spoken, the ones that had echoed in his chest, began to make sense. That night, as he locked his bike in front of the apartment building and prepared to go home, he paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. For the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. The days blurred together as Marcus continued his route, the hours stretching on like endless ribbons of time, each one more exhausting than the last. But there was something different now. A quiet shift inside him, something he couldn't quite name, but it was there. It was early afternoon when Marcus made his way to the next delivery. He stopped in front of a building that looked out of place among the others. Marcus approached cautiously, noticing the man's suit, neat and pressed, his expensive shoes gleaming in the sunlight. But instead of avoiding Marcus, the man smiled when he saw him, a genuine, welcoming smile that took Marcus by surprise. "Hey, you must be the delivery guy, huh?" Marcus didn't know what to say. "Yeah, that's me," Marcus said, offering the package. "Thanks, man," the man replied, taking it from his hands. Marcus's mind raced, but this man, this stranger, was acknowledging it. "Thanks," Marcus said, his voice hoarse, but the words felt lighter than they ever had before. The man nodded. Marcus blinked, surprised by the kindness in the man's voice. "I appreciate that," Marcus said, his throat tight. The man gave him a quick smile before heading inside the diner, leaving Marcus standing there for a moment, still trying to process the encounter. Marcus got back on his bike, the weight in his chest a little lighter, his thoughts a little clearer. He wasn't sure what had changed, but he knew it had. He kept riding, but for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel as long. The next few hours passed in a blur of deliveries, but Marcus noticed the small things now, the way people greeted him with a nod or a smile, the way the world felt just a little less cold. As the day drew to a close, Marcus made his last delivery, a small package to an apartment building on the edge of the city. The woman who answered was different from the others. "Thank you," she said, accepting the package. Marcus nodded, too tired to say much else. "Take care of yourself," she added, her voice soft. He looked at her for a moment, surprised by her words. She didn't have to say anything. As he rode away from the building, the city beginning to quiet down, Marcus let himself feel something he hadn't in a long time: hop. The next day, Marcus found himself in a different part of town. It was one of those neighborhoods that felt distant, removed from the rest of the city. He pulled up to a small corner store, the kind with a faded sign and cracked windows. The rain from the night before had left the streets wet, the air still heavy with the scent of fresh rain and damp earth. "You the delivery guy?" the man asked, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Yeah," Marcus replied, holding up the package. The man's eyes softened for a moment as he took the package. "She's not here right now." Marcus hesitated. "I'll leave it here for her. You can go on about your day, son," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Marcus stood still for a moment, taken aback by the kindness in the man's voice. "Thanks," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. The man nodded and walked to the back of the store, leaving Marcus standing in the doorway for a few seconds longer than he should have. He didn't know why, but the words lingered in his mind. Marcus stepped back outside, the cool air filling his lungs as he took in a deep breath. The world was still a heavy place, but for the first time in a long time, It didn't feel as overwhelming. He climbed back onto his bike and rode away, but this time the ride was different. The streets no longer felt as cold, the faces no longer seemed as distant. It was late in the afternoon when Marcus arrived at his final delivery for the day. The sun was starting to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows on the pavement. "Thank you for coming all the way out here," she said, her voice soft, genuine. Marcus smiled in return, surprised by her kindness. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill, holding it out to him. But Marcus didn't reach for it right away. "No tip needed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes softened, and she looked at him with something close to understanding. "You're doing the work that no one else wants to do," she said quietly. For a moment, Marcus didn't know how to respond. The words felt foreign to him. Respect. The woman stepped back and gestured for him to come inside, but Marcus shook his head. "I've got more deliveries," he said. As he got back on his bike, he realized that something had shifted inside him. The weight wasn't gone, not completely. The rain hadn't come back, and the city felt quieter than usual. The days had begun to feel different, lighter somehow, as Marcus continued. His deliveries, the kindness he had received from strangers, the quiet words that had begun to shift something inside him, had created a crack in the wall he had built around his heart. It was a Wednesday afternoon when he pulled up to his next stop, a small apartment complex on the edge of town. The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick, damp with the remnants of the storm. The apartment complex was quiet, the kind of place that felt a little forgotten, a little worn. A man stood in the doorway, his face hard, his posture rigid. "Package?" Marcus said, holding it out, his voice a little rougher than usual. The man didn't take the package right away. "You're late," the man finally said, his voice dripping with disdain. Marcus felt the familiar burn of frustration rise in his chest. He had heard it before, too many times to count. "I'm sorry, sir," Marcus said, keeping his tone even. The man didn't respond, just took the package with a grunt and slammed the door shut without a word. Marcus stood there for a moment, the sting of the interaction settling in like a cold chill. He had expected it, sure. He turned to leave, his bike waiting for him at the curb, but something made him stop. "You are not alone." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath. The words were familiar now, like an old friend calling out to him from the shadows. He turned back toward the door, his mind racing. Before he could overthink it, Marcus knocked on the door again, his heart pounding in his chest. The man opened the door, looking at him with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "What now?" he demanded. Marcus took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for being late," Marcus said, his voice steady but soft. "But I'm doing my best." For a moment the man said nothing. His face didn't soften, but something in his eyes shifted, just a little. He didn't apologize or say anything back. The man closed the door again, and Marcus stood there for a moment long, letting the silence settle around him. He hadn't gotten an apology. As he got back on his bike, the weight in his chest was still there, but it was lighter now. The world hadn't changed. The road ahead was still long. The following days seemed to pass in slow motion, each pedal of Marcus's bike bringing him closer to the end of his shift, yet further away from any real sense of progress. The hours wore on, the delivery stops blending together in a blur of tired faces and slammed doors. Each encounter, each small act of kindness, had begun to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. It was nearing dusk when Marcus arrived at the next address, a tall apartment building nestled on the edge of the city. The shadows stretched long across the sidewalk, the fading sun casting a golden glow on the world around him. He parked his bike in front of the building, his muscles aching from the ride. The air felt heavy, like the storm that had passed through earlier that day hadn't quite finished with him. As he approached the door, the elevator chimed from inside the building. Marcus stepped inside, taking the familiar ride up to the top floor. He reached the apartment and knocked, the sound of his fist echoing in the quiet hallway. It took a moment for the door to open, But when it did, Marcus was greeted by a familiar face. Ms. "Ah, Marcus." "Just doing my job," Marcus replied, offering her the package. "Ms. You've been delivering to us for a while now," she said. Marcus wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't used to being noticed, to having someone acknowledge the effort he put in. "I do my best," Marcus replied quietly. "You should be proud of that," Ms. Bennett said, her voice firm but gentle. "Not everyone would keep going the way you do." Marcus stood there, his throat tight, the weight of her words settling deep inside him. "Thank you, Ms." She smiled, her eyes warm. As Marcus turned to leave, he felt something inside him stir. It wasn't just a feeling of being seen, and it was a sense of being heard, a sense that he was more than just a delivery man, more than just the hours he put in, more than the sweat and the exhaustion. The ride back to his bike felt different now. He mounted his bike and began to ride home, the cool air hitting his face. The city stretched out before him, a place that had always felt indifferent, always felt like it was too big for someone like him to make a difference. The journey wasn't over. The road ahead was still long, and the it was still heavy. Marcus woke to the sound of rain, soft and steady against his window, like a constant reminder of the struggle ahead. The night had been long, and sleep hadn't come easily. He got up and pulled on his uniform, the familiar weight of it settling over him like a second skin. His legs were sore, his back stiff from the countless hours on the bike, but there was something different in the air today. He stepped outside into the rain, the damp air hitting his skin like a cold ember. Race. He mounted his bike and started pedaling, the tires humming softly against the wet pavement. His first stop was a small neighborhood near the city's edge. The buildings here were older, their walls cracked and faded from years of neglect. He made his first delivery, a small package to a woman who had been one of the first to ever offer him a kind word. She had thanked him with a smile the first time he'd arrived at her door, and every time after that she greeted him with the same warmth. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, taking the package from his hands. "I'm fine, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice steady, though there was a slight catch to it. "You've been working hard," the woman said as she handed him a few dollars. "I see you out here all the time, rain or shine." Marcus looked at her, his throat tight. She didn't know him, not really. She didn't know the weight he carried, the exhaustion in his bones, the bitterness that often threatened to take root. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled again, a soft, kind smile, and closed the door behind her. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of deliveries, each stop feeling a little lighter than the one before. The apartment building was a little more upscale than the others he'd visited, the doors gleaming with fresh paint and the walls covered in a layer of ivy. He had never been here before, but the address was familiar. "Package?" Marcus asked, holding out the delivery. The woman didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him for a moment, her gaze hard, calculating. "You're the delivery guy, huh?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice steady, but his chest tightening slightly. The woman took the package from his hands, but instead of closing the door, she held it in her hands for a moment longer than necessary. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't think people like you get enough credit," she said quietly, her voice softening just a little. Marcus blinked, unsure of what to say. He had heard the words before, but never from someone who didn't expect something in return. "You're not invisible," she added. Her words hit him like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't the bitterness or the anger he had come to expect. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman gave him a small nod and closed the door softly. The world wasn't perfect. People were cruel, still indifferent. The rain had returned by the time Marcus finished his deliveries, the steady patter against the pavement a familiar companion. As he made his way back toward the apartment, he reflected on the day's interactions. The small kindnesses, the woman at the apartment complex, the man at the diner, the old woman who had noticed his hard work, all of them had shifted something inside him. He parked his bike outside the building and walked toward the small corner store, the one he passed by every day but had never entered. He hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe. The bell above the door rang softly as he entered, and the old man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper, his eyes crinkling into a smile when he saw Marcus. "Well, well." Marcus glanced around the store, the shelves stocked with cans and jars, the aisles narrow but packed with goods. "Just some coffee," Marcus replied, his voice steady, though his heart was racing in his chest. The old man nodded, reaching for a bag of ground coffee. Marcus nodded, his eyes meeting the man's. The man didn't press him for more, but he slid the coffee across the counter with a smile. "Take a seat if you need to, son. You're welcome here." Marcus blinked, surprised by the kindness in the old man's voice. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. The old man gave him a nod and went back to his newspaper, leaving Marcus to stand there for a moment longer than he needed to. He left the store with the coffee in hand, the warmth of the cup a small comfort against the chill in the air. As he rode home, the streets stretching out before him, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe the world wasn't as cold as it seemed. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he was finally on the right path, and that, in itself, was enough. The morning was still, the streets unusually quiet, as Marcus set out for his first delivery, Airy. The air was cool, fresh from the rain, but there was a stillness in the city that felt almost peaceful. For the first time in weeks, Marcus woke up without the familiar sense of dread that usually accompanied his long shifts. He rode through the streets with a new sense of purpose, the usual ache in his legs still there, but it didn't seem to matter as much today. His first stop was a small apartment building near the edge of town. The building was old, its walls cracked, the paint peeling in places, but it was home to people who had lived there for years. He knocked on the door and a woman answered, her face tired but warm. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. The words weren't new, but today they felt different. "Thanks," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her expression understanding. As he turned to leave, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him, even if it was small. The day passed slow, each stop a reminder that he wasn't alone in the world. The kindness from strangers, the recognition of his hard work, had started to build something inside him. By the time he reached his last delivery, the sun was beginning to dip behind the buildings, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Delivery for Mr. The man took the package from his hands, but instead of closing the door, he stood there for a moment, looking at Marcus. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "I see you out here day in and day out. You're always working hard, no matter the weather." Marcus stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. I don't know what to say," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. The man smiled, his eyes kind. "You don't have to say anything." Marcus felt something shift in him, a quiet understanding that had been waiting to take root for so long. He wasn't invisible. As he rode away from the house, the sun beginning to set, Marcus felt the weight of the world a little, less pressing on his shoulders. It was still there, still heavy, but it didn't feel like it was suffocating him anymore. For the first time in a long time, Marcus believed in something more than just survival. The city around him didn't seem so cold anymore. The faces he passed no longer seemed as distant. Marcus woke before dawn, the city still dark and quiet, the streets blanketed in a soft layer of mist. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried a chill, a reminder of the storm that had passed. He stretched, his muscles sore from the day before, but the tiredness didn't feel the same. The weight he had carried for so long, the exhaustion, the frustration, the pain of being unseen, wasn't gone, but it was different now. He dressed quickly, pulling on his uniform, the familiar weight of it now feeling like a part of him. The bike was waiting for him, its frame old and worn, but still strong. The streets were empty at first, the quiet of the morning broken only by the sound of his breathing and the creak of his bike's pedals. As he rode through the neighborhoods, the familiar sights of the city, buildings, sidewalks, stores, felt different today. The weight of the world wasn't as crushing. His first stop was at a small house near the edge of town. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she had been expecting him. "Morning," he replied, his voice steady. "I see you out here, always working," she said, her gaze lingering on him. Marcus blinked, surprise. Said by her words. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that, but it was the first time it felt real. For the first time, he felt like someone understood, not just the work he did, but the effort it took to keep going every day. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled again, nodding. As he turned to leave, Marcus felt something stir inside him, a quiet sense of pride. He had spent so many years hiding in the background, trying to stay out of sight. The day passed slowly, each delivery bringing him closer to the end of his shift, but it also brought him closer to something else, something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in for a long time. Hope. His next stop was at a small apartment complex near the city center. "Package?" Marcus asked, holding it out to her. She nodded, taking the package from his hands. "I've got a lot of deliveries," Marcus replied with a small smile. She looked at him for a moment longer, as if weighing something in H. "Der mind. You've been working hard," she said quietly. Marcus's heart swelled with gratitude. It wasn't a grand gesture. He took the coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he held it. She smiled. As he walked back to his bike, the weight in his chest didn't feel as heavy as it had the day before. The road ahead was still long, still uncertain, but Marcus had learned something important over the past few weeks, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he could do that.